Member for Banff-Kananaskis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today and speak to Bill 30, the Expedited 120-Day Approvals Act. I have some of the similar questions to my colleague from Calgary, Glenmore, but I do want to start also by saying, of course, I support projects that build our economy and create stability and predictability for industry. And of course, I support processes that are efficient. I hate inefficiency, just in general. And so I support projects going through an application process in a timely manner. But it is really unclear to me how this bill addresses any slowdown in approvals, because I'm not actually sure when I read this bill where the barriers are or where the slowdowns in approvals are. And this bill doesn't amend any existing statutes or legislation or processes. It just says we're going to finish things in 120 days. It doesn't really identify what will be different. So I want to zoom in on clauses 2, 2, F, and G, because those to me are the really important ones in the bill. They talk about how environmental impact assessment and First Nations consultation status must be provided. I don't really know what status means. You could say it's ongoing or started. That is a status. That doesn't mean it's been completed. The minister has said in the House that environmental impact assessments and First Nations consultation processes must be completed before projects could enter this 120-day review time, but that is not what is in the Act. And I think what we have seen from previous pieces of legislation that have come forward from this government is if it's not in the legislation, we cannot guarantee that that is how it will happen. When we stood in this House and debated the All-Season Resorts Act, the Minister of Tourism and Sport assured me that all standard public consultation protocols would be followed to create all-season resort designated areas, and then the first all-season resort designated areas that we saw contravened that standard protocol and practice. So I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, if I don't trust this government to just do the right thing and making sure that all standard protocols are followed. If it's not in the piece of legislation, I can't trust that it will happen. And that frustrates me, Mr. Speaker, and it should frustrate industry as well, because it actually means that the 120-day approval might not be a 120-day approval. Because if the process isn't completed, it could get bounced back to the proponent, and then they're told to complete it, which would mean that it's not 120 days. Oh, maybe it'll be 200 or 300 or 500 days. So I think that if it's not in the legislation, we can't guarantee that it will happen, and that is frustrating for me and for others. The clauses say that the proof acceptable to the minister for the status of an EIA and for the First Nations consultation. Well, I don't love that. I've talked about that in the House before. I don't actually like it when the minister gets to decide when something is done, because the minister can change. As I have said many times in this House, we need to have more specific criteria of what is proof acceptable to the minister, what is status of the process, and that is not in here, and that's highly problematic. This bill creates a project coordination review team to provide recommendations to the minister of if a project should be approved or not, again, leaving it in the hands of the minister to decide. But that's also problematic to me, Mr. Speaker, because the Act doesn't define which minister. So it could be any or all ministers for any or all projects. Are all-season resorts included in this 120-day approval process? I get emails about all-season resorts every single day right now, because every single all-season resort that's been proposed is in my riding of Banff-Kananaskis, and I can tell you that the length of time of the approval process and the thoroughness of that process is the biggest concern that is coming forward from my constituents. So did those apply to this 120-day approval process? Also, what about the AI data centres that have come forward that we've been asking about in the House on multiple occasions? Do they also now apply to this? No offense, Mr. Speaker, but I get very little confidence whenever I ask the ministers opposite about an environmental impact assessment, I have very little confidence that they truly understand what it is and why it's important and why we do them. So I'm just going to take a moment to describe why environmental impact assessments are important and why they take so long, because I don't think the members opposite truly understand. One of the reasons why EIAs take a long time, Mr. Speaker, is because we have seasons here. And we have 4 seasons, in fact, and winter is very different from summer. And the animals are very different in their behaviors and habitat choices, or even in the case of migratory birds, if they're even here. So you can't conduct an environmental impact assessment over the winter and say that those results apply to year-round wildlife habitat security and availability and population and distribution, because many of those animals aren't active during the winter, Mr. Speaker. And I see the members opposite kind of chuckling at this idea that we have seasons, but I'll also just say that I have read environmental impact assessments that tried to say that winter was sufficient for field work to assess impacts on wildlife movement and habitat use year-round. So there is a reason why environmental impact assessments take so long, and there's a reason why those environmental impact assessments need to be so thorough. We're talking about large projects with potentially large impacts on the land, water, and communities. It takes time to do a good job here. And so I would really hate for an act like this to lead to cutting corners or doing a bad job just to try to meet a deadline. If there's one thing that I have learned in doing wildlife-based research, it's that the existence of a deadline doesn't make you do better work. The existence of a deadline, if you're just by yourself, forces you to consider how to do a worse job but make it look like you still did a good job. In the bill briefing, I did ask people if this bill will result in hiring more people to review project proposals so that they can get these projects reviewed in a more timely fashion. And the answer was no. So if you're not increasing the capacity of the people to review these proposals, and you're not changing the amount of information that is required for this process, because apparently environmental impact assessments and First Nations consultation will need to be completed, I don't really know what's new. I don't think, unlike the minister's insinuations, I don't think people in the public service and in the regulator are sitting on their thumbs waiting for something to happen. I think they're all working very hard to review the projects that are coming across their desks. Giving them a deadline of 120 days without changing anything else in the system is not going to help projects go through the process any faster, Mr. Speaker. It's just going to create a lot of stress for the people who are actually doing the work and reviewing these project proposals. I don't think that people in the public service and in the regulator are slacking off. I think they're busting their butts to try to do all of the work that is being asked of them. And I just want to take a moment to say thanks, because I think that the work that they're doing is incredibly hard. It's really complex. These large processes, these large projects are complex. If we don't take the time to fully understand the impacts of these developments, we run the risk of creating lawsuits and massive environmental liabilities that future Albertans will have to take care of. The importance of First Nations consultation also cannot be understated. There are multiple lawsuits from First Nations against the Government of Alberta right now because they haven't done their due diligence to take the time to understand cumulative effects or the impacts of existing developments on water quality, land use, traditional rights, traditional access to lands, and many more factors. So if we're doing the best job in the world on First Nations consultation, which we aren't, it's almost insulting that the minister could even insinuate that. But if we were, wow. We should actually be working every single day to improve our processes for First Nations consultation and engagement on large projects. It's actually embarrassing to me that the minister would even stand up there and say that we have one of the best systems in the world for First Nations engagement and consultation. I used to work for the public service, Mr. Speaker. I've done the First Nations consultation as per the Aboriginal Consultation Office, and I can tell you one of the first things that I heard from every Indigenous consultation office that I met with was how it felt like it was a box-ticking exercise and not meaningful, and not providing enough time or funding for site visits to accurately consider the treaty rights and the true relationship to the land that our Indigenous brothers and sisters bring to the table. It's a box-ticking exercise, it's a rubber stamp, it doesn't generate respect, and it definitely isn't addressing truth and reconciliation, and it is definitely not the best in the world. It is not. And our environmental impact assessment process is also, there's so many. Our environmental impact assessment is also not the best in the world, Mr. Speaker. It isn't. I'm sorry. We have a government that is exempting 3 data centres from having to do an environmental impact assessment right now. In Bill 31, the government has included clauses where the Alberta regulator doesn't have to conduct public hearings. Well, that will feed quite nicely into this 120-day approval if public hearings don't have to be conducted on these large projects, Mr. Speaker. All of these things together contribute to a government that isn't taking this seriously. This bill, while I support regulatory efficiencies and I support 120-day approvals, I actually think this bill is disingenuous because I don't think it will be able to be honoured, because still all of that background work will have to be done before a project is funneled through this process for the 120-day approval. So I'm struggling a little bit to think about what problem this bill solves, because it doesn't identify how it's going to make things move faster. It doesn't identify increasing capacity in the regulator. It doesn't identify what is proof acceptable to the Minister of Environmental Impact Assessments or First Nations consultations. And I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but I don't trust this minister when it comes to his ability to judge whether an EIA or First Nations consultation is adequate. He proves, not him, sorry, Mr. Speaker. This government proves and demonstrates every single day that they don't understand what an effective EIA is or what adequate First Nations consultation is. And so while I support the bill, there's no way I trust this government to implement it in a way that actually serves the people.
Thank you. Any others wishing to speak to Bill 30?